We're here inside the John Brown, or actually their Adair cabin, where John Brown and his men stayed for some time. And this is a pretty important place since in the spring of 1856, there was a massacre that took place in Wakarusu, which is Lawrence. And at that particular time, their buildings were burnt down and people were tortured and killed. And these bushwhackers met very, very little resistance. But when John Brown came to the area, he had heard that there were 5 men who took place in that massacre who lived just outside of Osawatomie at Potawatomi Creek. He and his men went and sought those men out. And as a result of finding them, they drugged them out of their homes and butchered them in cold blood. From that moment on, Kansas became known as Bleeding Kansas. It was one of the first times in the history of this country where anti-slavery forces progressively sought revenge and attacked slavery forces, and happened right outside of Osawatomie. After that particular engagement, John Brown and his men came back to this cabin that has been preserved by the Osawatomie State Historical Society. December 20th, 1858, John Brown and his men decide that they're going to go into Missouri, where the bushwhackers are, and liberate Africans who are on plantations. They collect 11 Africans and ferry those Africans to freedom, to Canada. They left Missouri, went into Kansas City, Kansas, at the Quindara site. From Quindara, they went into Lawrence. From Lawrence, they came here to Osawatomie in their Adair cabin, where these 11 Africans hid. They stayed here for a few days. Afterwards, they headed north through Holton. At that particular time, the pro-slavery forces were hot on their heels and caught up with them in Holton. And a famous battle took place called the Battle of the Spurs. And this is what happened. John Brown and his men were outnumbered 2-1. Running, they decided to face their enemy, face their attackers. And he gave the command to charge. Once he charged, the pro-slavery forces turned around and kicked up their heels and ran for cover, all except for 2 or 3. The John Brown party captured those 2 or 3 and brought them with them out of the territory until they finally released them unharmed. But because of those others who were part of the pro-slavery faction, they decided to use their spurs to get out of there on their horses. That became known as the Battle of the Spurs. We're here in Nebraska City, Nebraska, to illustrate 2 things. One, an Underground Railroad site, just like the one Henry Strong had in Manhattan. 2, not all Underground Railroad stations were in homes or in the woods. Some were underground, actually. This is the case in point. We're in Nebraska City, Nebraska, at the Mayhew Village. This spot was a place that was on the Underground Railroad, a place where Africans hid before moving on to Iowa and on into Canada. As you can see, there's not much space as far as ceiling room, and it is hand dug. It is exactly about the same size of the cave that was in Manhattan, that was hand dug by Henry Strong. Looking around, and one area over here you may have had 7 or 8 people. One area over here you could have 7 or 8 people. Maybe 16 or 20 people in all would have stayed here during the day and then went out at nighttime. It's fascinating how this long tunnel had two entrances, or one entrance and one exit. That was very important. Always have an escape route, just in case danger was nearby. This history that is called the Underground Railroad. I call it the first civil rights movement. The first civil rights movement that
showed us how blacks and whites and red peoples could work together. And it gives me a great feeling. It gives me a great feeling of respect and responsibility. It is this reality of walking in those people's footsteps, really, that allows me to know whose shoulders we are all standing on. When we educate our minds, there's no telling what things you and I can accomplish. So please spread the word about our ancestors and don't forget to practice what you preach.